You know that kind of neighbor who believes that everything in the world belongs to her, from the air we breathe to the space in her garage? That's exactly what I was dealing with. A woman with an ego the size of an entire city and the sense of boundaries of a headless chicken. The most incredible thing was how naturally she did things, as if stopping the car in my garage was a gesture of kindness. Like, "Look how cute. I took up your space so you wouldn't feel so alone." I wanted to laugh, but I hated it more. The first day I found her SUV standing there in broad daylight, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was a lost visitor, someone with Google GPS stuck. I looked around, looked for someone, clapped my hands, waited a few minutes. Nothing. Not a soul alive. It wasn't until the end of the day that I discovered the truth. She came out of the house next door, wearing that cream blazer, sunglasses that she never took off, and that haughty walk of someone who thinks she's CEO of the planet. She didn't even look at me. He simply unlocked the car, got in, and drove off as if it were the most natural thing in the world, without apologizing, without leaving a note, without the slightest sense of shame. I stood there with my mouth open, my hand still holding the supermarket bags and a packet of diapers that had almost fallen to the ground from how long I'd been frozen. The next day, the miracle was repeated. White SUV, personalized license plate, same position, same scowl. My garage became a VIP parking lot, and I didn't even receive the notice. When I tried to talk to her, she unleashed the pearl of the century. Her space was always empty. I thought she wouldn't mind. Wouldn't mind? It was my garage, the place where I park the car that I pay for, fuel, insure, and clean. Where I leave tools, where the dog sleeps in the summer when the sun is beating down. She talked about my garage as if it were a public parking space in a decaying shopping mall. I took a deep breath. I still tried to stay calm. I went to the HOA, filed a formal complaint, asked them to send a notice. Guess what? They laughed. They said that it was a matter between neighbors and that the association didn't interfere in simple coexistence disputes. Simple for who? The following week, her car was still there every day, and she began to feel so comfortable that she even left the window half open, as if it were her own backyard. One day, I came home and found a little bottle of her water on top of my toolbox, as if it were a deposit. Another time, she left the car with the trunk door open, right in front of me, getting in the way. I began to realize that she was doing this on purpose. It wasn't about space anymore. It was about control. She wanted to mark her territory, like a dog peeing on a tree. Only in her case, it was imported perfume and a look of disdain. I became increasingly irritated. My wife started to get stressed too. She came home from work and had nowhere to stop. She had to walk down the block, leave the car in the street, and walk back carrying a backpack, a handbag, a lunchbox, and her dignity in pieces. One night, she arrived shaking with rage because she had been hit by another car as she left the improvised parking space. And for what reason? Because the woman next to her thought she could park in our garage just because. I tried a civilized approach again. I printed out a sheet of paper and put it in the car window with a polite, almost poetic message. Please do not park in this space. This is private property. We appreciate your understanding. The next day, I found the paper crumpled on the ground, with a stick of chewing gum stuck in the middle. I should have framed it as a symbol of human impudence. I began to think that maybe I was the problem, that I was overreacting, that maybe I should be more community-minded. But that was short-lived. The final straw came when I went to clean the outside of the garage and noticed that the tire of her car had left marks in the fresh paint. Deep marks, like wounds. It was as if the car was mocking my existence. I tried to call the police. They told me they couldn't tow without a visible prohibition sign, so I bought a sign. 2, actually. 1 on each side of the gate. Private parking. Subject to towing. Very big, bright red. The kind you see 2 blocks away. The next day, there was her car, in the same position, as if nothing had changed. It was at that moment that I understood. There was no point in warning. There was no point in talking. There was no point in HOAs, police, posters, or goodwill. This was war, and I was about to win. I spent the week researching ownership laws, local regulations, towing companies, and dismantling. I discovered that, technically, if the vehicle is repeatedly left on private property against the owner's will, and there is documentation of the attempted notification, the property owner has the right to remove it with a stipulated deadline. And since I had already tried everything, had a photo, video, copy of the license plate, HOA registration, ticket, date, time, everything, I was covered. The last piece was missing, finding someone who would take her car straight to a junkyard. And I did. A guy called Rick, who owned a junkyard 2 towns over. A guy who didn't ask too many questions, but solved the problem. I agreed everything. I asked for discretion. He said he would do the job with care. I confess I slept better that night. The next day, I woke up at 6 a.m., had coffee with a smile on my face, and sat on the balcony. Her car was there, shining in the sun, as if it were challenging my sanity. At 8 a.m. sharp, I heard the truck rumbling in, and there, at that moment, the real show began. Rick's winch truck arrived like a morning symphony, a low, metallic noise, full of meaning, the kind of sound that announces that the day is not going to be a quiet one. A sturdy truck, dirty with grease, with the letters Rick's Recovery and Scrap hand-painted on the side. The driver got out of the vehicle with the calmness of someone who has done this kind of job 1,000 times. He wore a t-shirt, a cap turned backwards, and a smile on his face that said, "Today is a fun day." He waved hello and walked straight to the woman's car. He didn't ask her anything. He didn't want to know if she was at home. He knew what he had to do. He grabbed the chain, pulled it out of the back compartment, slipped it under the chassis of the SUV, and began to attach it as if he were wrapping a very special Christmas present. The contrast was funny. The noisy, heavy, scratched winch, and the clean, white SUV, with its smell of suburban wealth and perfumed leather seat. One looked like a rhinoceros, the other, a lady's poodle. But at that moment, the rhino won. I sat in the chair on the balcony, got my coffee, and watched the scene. One of the sweetest moments of my life. I was about to take revenge for weeks of abuse, neglect, arrogance, and ridiculous assumptions. Nothing at that moment felt wrong. In fact, it felt divinely right. A lesson being taught before the eyes of the street. Rick looked at me, held up his thumb and said, 5 more minutes, and we'll take you to the end of the line. It was the first speech of the day, and it was wonderful. As he pulled the car with the dexterity of someone who drags other people's pride, some neighbors began to appear. First, the gentleman walking 3 dogs. Then, the lady on the corner of the street who prunes her plants and never looks anyone in the eye. Now she did, and she looked with pleasure. A couple who always ran past today decided to walk very slowly. The street, until then silent, became a spectacle. But the big moment came when the woman finally noticed. She burst through the door. Messy hair, slippers, a mug of tea in her hand, and a robe that looked like it had come straight out of a witch movie. It took him a few seconds to realize what was happening. The SUV was already being lifted. The back was already swinging in the air, like a trophy captured in war. She ran to the gate, shouted something unintelligible, and opened the latch with a dry noise. It sounded like a storm was coming, but there, in front of everyone, she became small, tiny. The woman who for weeks had thought she was the owner of the street was now begging with wide eyes. And when she finally managed to articulate words, it was just screaming. "You can't do this! It's my car! This is theft!" Rick calmly wiped his hand on the cloth, turned around, and replied, "It's parked on private property, with a registered notice. The document is with me, ma'am. Anything else? It's up to his lawyer." That was it. That was the second and last line. Nothing more was needed. It was the kind of sentence that carries more weight than any speech. The woman stopped. She almost tripped over her own pride. Her mouth hung open for about 5 seconds, enough to make her look like an angry statue. She tried to run to the winch, but Rick was already inside the truck, accelerating. The sound of the chain tensioning and the metallic sound of the SUV being pulled was almost poetic. She shouted once more, but no one answered. Only the engine roared in response, and the car drove away. It turned the corner and disappeared, as if it had never existed. The silence that followed was almost religious. The woman stood in the middle of the sidewalk, hugging herself, as if in shock. The neighbors looked the other way. Some went inside. Others continued to watch. She turned away and went back into the house, slamming the gate with a force that echoed. Later that day, I received a visit from the police. 2 nice officers, but visibly bored with the call. I explained everything, showed them the records, the private property sign, the emails to the HOA, the photos of the car parked there for days on end, and, of course, the lawyer's paperwork. One of them even gave a discreet chuckle. "Yes, technically, you did everything legally," he said, leafing through the papers. "But she's going to try to make a fuss. Just be prepared." She made noise. She called the HOA. She sent a note. She tried to sue me for moral damage and public embarrassment. But it didn't stick. The HOA remained on the fence, as always. When it realized she was going down, it sneaked away, pretending to be neutral. Her lawsuit didn't last 2 months. It was dismissed for lack of grounds. But the most curious thing wasn't the judicial uproar, it was what happened in the days that followed. She started parking on the street, in public spaces. Like any mortal, she went out less, stopped with her head down, avoided crossing eyes, not because she was sorry, but because she knew that her reign was over, and the best was yet to come. What I found out later, by pure chance, would make the whole plan worth 1,000. But that you'll understand better in the next part. After her car was taken, everything became more calm, a kind of wary calm, like when you know an earthquake is over, but you still fear the aftershock. The woman went into hiding. Not that she disappeared completely. This kind of figure doesn't disappear, she just changes strategy. The next few days were silent. No notes on the gate, no calls from the HOA, no educational visits with pamphlets on community living. But behind the silence, something was moving. The kind of movement that doesn't make a sound, but stinks from afar. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. A friend of mine, who works in a garage in the neighboring town, called me. His workshop, coincidentally, is a partner of the same junkyard that Rick sells the towed cars to. They dismantle them, reuse what they can, and resell the rest. According to him, the white SUV that had arrived a few days earlier, with license plates still in the system, was in the yard waiting for parts to be released, and with a glove compartment full of papers. Curious as I am, I asked him to take a look. I never imagined I'd find anything useful. In the middle of the car's paperwork, apart from the owner's manual and an old makeup bag, there was a red folder. You know that classic plastic folder with the transparent zipper? Just like the one his wife always carried to HOA meetings. Only this one was much more worn and dirty. Inside, a veritable arsenal. Documents, photos, copies of association notices, draft letters, and a list. A handwritten list. The list had names, addresses, notes such as lawn not up to standard, fence exceeds the limit, door painted in an unapproved color, a kind of hate map, a personal stalking guide, and of course, my name was there, with the remark, "Garage rarely used, idle space, monitor as if it were a field study." The woman was treating me like a territorial domination project. It stopped being about the parking space a long time ago. It was obsession. What made me most astonished was that there were more than 20 names on the list. People who, like me, had probably suffered some form of abuse disguised as community zeal. She was a collector of petty issues, a hunter of small irregularities, a kind of spiritual trustee who fed off the chaos in others. Every name there was proof that my vacancy was just the tip of the iceberg. With the images of the documents in hand, I spoke to my lawyer again. He told me to hand everything over to the HOA and, if I wanted, to present it at a meeting. I did better. I sent anonymous copies to each person on the list, with a printed note that said, "You're being watched. Here's the proof." The following week, the neighborhood became a mixture of paranoia and rebellion. People meeting on the sidewalk, whispering in corners, exchanging messages in the neighborhood group, demanding an emergency meeting with the HOA board. The committee, which always acted with purposeful slowness, this time had no escape. They scheduled a meeting in record time. On the day of the meeting, the community hall looked like an assembly from the apocalypse. Everyone was there, including her, with an air of superiority that seemed to be hanging by a thread. She walked in as if nothing had happened, greeting people with that rehearsed smile, but the looks around her were different. No one smiled back. She entered as queen. She left as a defendant. The meeting began with protocol, notes, announcements, accountability, until one of the committee members asked to speak. It was Mr. Davidson, one of the neighbors on the list, a calm man, always neutral, but that day he was red with anger. He stood up, held up an envelope and said, "I've been here for 20 years. I've never had to raise my voice. But today, I want to know why my name is on a persecution list drawn up by someone who claims to care for the community." The room froze. The envelope was passed forward. The woman tried to laugh, tried to mock, said something like, "That's absurd. This must be a montage." That's when Mrs. Tilda, the most gossipy woman in the neighborhood, and the first on the list, pulled out a second envelope and retorted, "Then explain why my grandson's name is in your notebook, with the annotation, problem child, destroyed rose in the garden. He's 4 years old." She was speechless. Her face turned pale, then red, then a mixture of the two, like someone about to explode or faint. For the first time, I didn't know what to say. Her voice caught. She tried to pick up her bag, tried to leave, but it was too late. The hall had become a people's court. The evidence spread like wildfire. People began to relate their experiences. The anonymous tickets, the unfair fines, the pointless complaints. When the meeting was over, the HOA determined that she would be suspended from her duties for inappropriate conduct, personal harassment, and abuse of power. It was the beginning of the end. Her empire, built on crooked looks and aggressive notifications, was crumbling. And it all started because of a parking space. The neighborhood was never the same after that, and the story still had a special outcome to come. Her suspension was just the beginning. Like any decadent empress, the woman tried to hold on to what little power she still had in her fingers, pretending that the HOA's decision was temporary, that it was all a misunderstanding fabricated by spiteful neighbors, and that she would soon be back on the throne. Only this time, nobody bought her narrative. Because when a lie is exposed with proof, there's no room for gossip, there's shame. And her shame became the main topic of the mornings on the sidewalk. She continued to live there, of course, but with the aura of authority she had cultivated for years now completely dismantled. Every step down the street was a reminder of public humiliation. The woman who used to make her rounds in a blazer and clipboard now walked with her head down, bags in hand. And sometimes you could even hear the sound of her slippers dragging on the asphalt. The irony was precisely in the silence she hated so much. She, who used to hand out notes and warnings, now didn't even get a good morning back. The gate to her house, once polished and well-kept, was now rusting. The garden lost its flowers. The mailbox, once the object of envy in the neighborhood group, was now crooked. It is said that all this began to happen when she went to war with her own mirror. Because seeing herself without the veneer of authority must have hurt more than any formal punishment. She was no longer the woman in charge. Now she was just the woman from the SUV scandal. A month after the community explosion, the HOA called a general meeting. The purpose was to vote on the woman's permanent removal from the association's board of directors. The meeting was packed. Everyone wanted to see the formal downfall of the neighborhood's icon of aesthetic and moral repression. Did she? She went, with all her face and courage. More haggard, without makeup, with a briefcase in her hand that carried nothing but wounded pride. The vote was symbolic. No one had to say much. Each yes echoed like another nail in the coffin of the little empire she had built on gossip, tickets, and ugly faces. There were 43 votes in favor of removal, only one against, which was probably her own. The announcement was made naturally, without emotion, but the atmosphere carried something bordering on catharsis, a collective liberation, the end of an era marked by the fear of getting the shade of paint wrong on the door. On the way out, she passed me. She looked at me, opened her mouth, but said nothing. It looked like she was about to spit out a sentence, an apology, perhaps, or perhaps a threat in disguise. But he didn't have the courage. The look she gave him was no longer arrogant. It was just empty, like someone who had lost the script of a character they had played for so long that they had forgotten who they really were. The following week, the rumor arrived. She was selling the house. The ad appeared discreetly on a real estate website, with no sign on the gate, no word of mouth among the neighbors. The price? Well below average. You could sense the desperation in the price, as if she wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. And disappear she did. One day, she just disappeared. The garage empty, the lights off, the curtains closed, no car at the gate. The house that used to be the headquarters of microfascism was now just a piece of property waiting for someone to respect its boundaries. The last memory I had of it was a few days before I moved in. I saw her through the window in the late afternoon. She was in the garden, crouching down, plucking flowers with her hands, like someone undoing every trace of her own history. She was throwing everything into a black garbage bag. She wasn't even wearing gloves. Her nails were dirty. Her hair was tied up in any way. The woman who once called the neighbor's dog a public menace was now fighting with a hydrangea root. Sadness is a weed that grows quickly when arrogance becomes fertilizer. The neighborhood took a breath. The neighborhood group went back to talking about recipes, promotions, and lost puppies. The HOA underwent a complete renovation with more humane rules, fewer fines, more tolerance. People painted their doors blue, purple, even green. The lady on the corner planted a cactus across the sidewalk, and nobody complained. The guy at number 74 parked a yellow van in the driveway and wasn't fined. Fear had gone along with the queen of oppression. And best of all, the garage was mine again, completely mine. No one else dared to put so much as a wheel in it. I started leaving my car there when I was at home, just to make a point. I bought a new sign, "Park here, and you'll be recycled." A touch of humor, but with a built-in warning. The story had left its mark, on the neighborhood, on me, and on the junkyard. One day, Rick called me again. He said that the SUV had been dismantled, piece by piece. Seats sold, dashboard reused, wheels resold to a guy in another city. But the glove compartment, the one that contained her files, he kept intact. He asked me if I wanted to keep it as a souvenir. I said no. Some things need to be scrapped, not to be forgotten, but never to be put back together again. And that's it. In the end, a parking space revealed much more than a parking problem. It revealed power, abuse, ego, and how much a person can corrupt themselves just to feel in control of a street. Her car is gone, but the sound of the chain pulling that SUV still echoes like music in my ears. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.